Good morning. I would like to, before we begin the specific discussion of our startup planning, to take a moment to speak to the moment in our society. As you know, in the aftermath of the tragic death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, many people have come together across racial and ethnic and other boundaries to protest the racism that many African Americans and other minorities have been subject to um, here in the United States and even around the world. Some due to policies, some due to the action of law enforcement, and sometimes private citizens. As a result, there have been and are calls for various forms of protest, including marches, and today a STEM-based university stand down or strike. Now, I have not shut down all university operations per se, but I have asked every portfolio leader to shift the focus of any meetings they have scheduled for today to discuss racism and racial disparities in academia, in science and engineering, in Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, to ensure greater diversity, equity, and inclusive excellence here, and how we can better bridge divides to promote healing, understanding, collaboration, and respect among all peoples. Now, to reach such a state requires more than one time or a one-day action. It requires sustained work. And I have therefore asked that what we do today becomes the launch of a year-long university-wide discussion about racism and inequity. Importantly, such a discussion must become the basis of sustained action to examine ourselves and our commitment to treat those who are least represented in our community better, and to become more inclusive, and to increase our diversity, and to ensure that all have an equal pathway to success. Now, I have been struck by the words of the first Black service chief in U.S. military history, who was recently confirmed by the U.S. Senate by a 98-0 vote. I'm speaking of General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., the new Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. In a video released by him a few days before his confirmation, he spoke of many things, in particular, the obstacles he faced as he climbed the ranks in the Air Force, the low expectations of him by other members of the military, the pressure to perform error-free, how his nomination provides some hope, but how it comes with a heavy burden. Importantly, he said the following, and I quote, "I can't fix centuries of racism in our country, nor can I fix decades of discrimination that may have impacted members of our Air Force. I'm thinking about how I can make improvements personally, professionally, and institutionally so that all airmen, both today and tomorrow, appreciate the value of diversity and can serve in an environment where they can reach their full potential." Now his words, and that's his quote, now his words are directly translatable into Rensselaer, what we must work for and achieve here because of the unique role we play as a technological research university and what that means in terms of uplifting lives and creating greater equity and fairness in our society and around the world. And to that end, let me then begin my discussion of our return to campus planning. And as I do so, I'm going to introduce members of the leadership team who are here and ask them to give you a wave. Greg Randolph Easton, our Vice President for Institute Advancement. John Kolb, our CIO and Vice President for Information Services and Technology. John Wexler, our Vice President for Enrollment Management, Barbara Howell, our CFO and VP for Finance, Craig Cook, our General Counsel and Secretary of the Institute, Mr. Claude Rounds, our Vice President for Administration, John Dordick, who is a Special Assistant to the President for Strategic Initiatives and the Howard P. Eisman Professor of Chemical and Biological Engineering, Dr. Lee McElroy, who is our Director of Athletics and Associate Vice President, Dr. Leslie Lawrence, who is our Director of our Wellness and Health, Dr. Peter Konworski, who's our Vice President for Student Life, Dr. Prabhat Hajela, our Provost, Dr. Robert Hull, our Vice President for Research, Ms. Richie Hunter, our Vice President for Strategic Communications and External Relations, Mr. Curtis Powell, I think I got you, our Vice President for Human Resources, Mr. Vadim Thomas, our Associate Vice President and Director of Public Safety. And I believe I have everyone that I should introduce. And importantly, Ms. Jen Brock, who is the Director of Office Operations for the Office of the President and Manager of Board Relations. She seems to be staying hidden at the moment. And if I missed him, Dr. Peter Konworski, I think I have him. So let me begin this way. And Jen, if you could put up the content for me. And so the important piece here, the next slide, please, is that what we're going to talk with you about today is that when we talk about return to campus, it will be when New York State allows. As you know, the governor has laid out hurdles that each region has to meet. And then as those hurdles are met, different phases of the economy are opened up. Higher education happens to be in phase 4, which if in any given region is the last phase. Although there are some early things that one may be able to do, but one cannot start full campus operations. So what we're going to talk about are those things that we intend to do when we are allowed to open. Some months ago, early in our shutdown, I created a startup task force. That task force is chaired by our provost, Professor Prabhat Hajela, and by our Vice President for Human Resources, Mr. Curtis Powell. That task force has operated around certain work groups to create overall workflow. Next slide. And they cover the areas of protocols and what we call TQSQ, which stands for testing, tracking, surveillance, and quarantine, teaching and learning, campus life, research and graduate education, and financial modeling and guidance. And so, Curtis, I'm going to start with you and ask you to give an overview, followed by our provost to talk about how you all organize the work.
President Jackson, thank you for that introduction. Let me share with you is that the president established an executive command group. And the executive command group consists of those individuals you were just introduced to by the president. Second group was what we call our emergency operational group. And this is a corresponding group to those vice presidents in the various areas. Now, there were 7 core areas that we wanted to look at. And the purpose of this entire process was to develop sound protocols and strategies to ensure the health and safety of our campus community and all individuals within our community should and when we reopen to face-to-face instruction. And the areas of focus was first to look at the health and safety protocols. Second, the instructional component, a research focus, the campus and residential life, safety education and compliance training, as well as general health principles and practices. And we wanted to ensure our policies and practices would support the reopening of the campus within these changes. And so both of these groups, the executive command group, as well as the emergency operational group, are putting together and have put together a key strategy as we work towards reopening the campus. Let me turn it over to my colleague and co-chair, Provost Hajel.
Curtis. Let me just add and say that the building this plan was really a team effort that spanned all of our portfolios at the Institute. It has drawn upon input from many members of the Rensselaer community. As Curtis pointed out, there was a strong focus on health and safety of the campus and the extended community. And even as we engage within our community to develop a plan that works for our sized institution and was aligned with the mission of the Institute, we were also in conversation with representatives from various institutions across the state to exchange ideas that were applicable across a broader range and spectrum of institutions. As part of our outreach to the Rensselaer community, we were interested in soliciting ideas for education and pedagogy that were best suited for the environment we may find ourselves in the fall semester. Keith Moo Young, our Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, worked with faculty representatives who not only met and consulted among themselves, but also held listening sessions that were open to faculty. These were well-attended sessions, and several ideas and suggestions emerged that will help us implement the plan as we head into the fall. Similarly, our acting VP for research conducted listening sessions with faculty around return to research. And at the behest of the faculty, Dr. Lawrence and Claude Rounds held listening session on concerns of the faculty and staff on health matters. So we received this input, we distilled it, and we have put it into the plan. And I'll turn it back to Dr. Jackson to lay out the elements of the plan.
Thank you very much. Earlier, I shared with our community certain overarching considerations that we wanted to be sure people were aware of and formed a framework around which this plan is built. And let me just reiterate those for you. The first is that the beginning and end of each academic term, as you will hear, will be different from the published academic calendar. Secondly, the students should not expect to have all of their fellow classmates on the campus in the same term or even the same day because of the need to de-densify the campus in order to adhere to public health protocols, including proper social distancing, because of our own community members' assessment of their vulnerabilities and comfort with in-person campus operations. Next, course delivery will be a hybrid of in-person and remote instruction, while classroom structure and class scheduling will reflect the public health protocols. Students will be spread out in the residential commons. Meals will not be served in the usual way. There will be specific social distancing protocols that all must adhere to. And masks will be required of students when they're not in their personal spaces, and our faculty and staff when they're not in their personal workspaces. Now, athletics are still under discussion, and I'll mention a little bit more about that, but we do not anticipate a full athletic schedule. There will not be any large gatherings on the campus of any kind, and there will be continual testing, contact tracing, and health condition information gathering that everyone will be asked and expected to report. And finally, everyone is expected to comply with all public health and safety protocols and institute protocols as a requirement to be on the campus and or to participate in in-person instruction. So now let me begin with a broader discussion of our plan. And so now we can have everyone appear. So as you know, during the campus closure brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Institute adopted remote instruction as a way to continue its academic program offerings. And once New York State authorizes higher education institutions to resume face-to-face instruction, the plan we will describe will constitute our framework for return to new normal operations. And the plan outlines, in fact, how the Institute will monitor the health and wellness of our community, how we will continue our academic and research programs, how we will manage residential operations, including student support services, dining services, NCAA athletics when they are allowed to start, campus-wide administrative operations and events. But importantly, central to the plan is a focus on the health and safety of the entire Rensselaer community, including those individuals who may interact with members of our community by lessening risk and mitigating consequences. Lessening risks and mitigating consequences. And so this plan provides guidance on returning to the campus and campus-based operations in a deliberate series of steps, the timing of which cannot be determined independently, and they reflect our best understanding of the contagion of COVID-19, its community spread, and our ability to manage its appearance among members of our community. And so let me begin. I talked about the fact that our students should not expect to have all of their fellow classmates on campus in the same term or even the same day. So let me speak to that. So for the fall semester, with rare exceptions, only the freshmen, seniors, and graduate students and juniors will be invited for in-person instruction. And so the junior class, which is going through the Arch summer semester online, will return to the campus for in-person instruction, but then will be asked to take their Arch semester away in the spring of 2021. Sophomores will continue to take remote instruction through the fall semester and then return for in-person instruction in the spring of 2021. And that is because they then will progress into the Arch summer semester and through the summer of 2021. Now, if you look at what a number of other schools have proposed, they have looked to spread instruction across 3 different semesters. And effectively, that is what we are doing. We're no different than that. We do feel it is important for the freshmen to come in as a cohort freshman year because it is an adjustment for them to a different way of learning and living and personal growth. And so it's important for them to have a coherent experience through the first year with continuity. And then there would be the summer break for them, the usual, because the sophomore year becomes quite intense. Now, the sophomores will essentially be here for 2 out of 3 semesters. That gives them an extended time with their class, which is in fact the purpose of the Arch. And so we're purposeful as part of our thinning out de-densification criteria. Now the juniors are naturally on the Arch track, and what we've said in having them come to the campus in the fall reflects the fact that with the COVID-19 shutdown, most juniors to this point, as far as we know, have not specifically pinned down an Archaway experience. And so this allows them to continue their education and have an on-campus junior experience in the fall, and then be prepared to go away in the spring for the Archaway experience. And the seniors, we want to keep them on track to graduate on time. And we recognize that graduation and the things that lead up to it are major transition points in the lives of our seniors. And so we want the fullest experience possible that we can offer. And so that is why they would be here for the full year. And so these are significant changes, but they are important in order for us to achieve what we need to achieve for the health and safety of all of our members. Now, the ability to maintain appropriate social distancing in a classroom will determine the format of a course. And I will talk more about it. But even if you just think about the potential of pandemic-related disruption of student travel, all classes, including those taught in person, will be available for online access. And importantly, and here's the next message, the academic calendar will be adjusted and is being adjusted to complete all in-person instruction by Thanksgiving, having the balance of instruction and final exams and assessments completed in a remote format. Because given where we are and our desire to not have students exposed any more than necessary as a flu season would typically start, and given how little instruction typically goes on in person after the Thanksgiving holiday, we would complete all in-person instruction by Thanksgiving, and then the balance would occur in a remote format, and that would include final exams and assessments, etc. Now, our actual plan for campus-based operations, first and foremost, is predicated on our goal of being able to test broadly and frequently for the appearance of COVID-19 infection, as well as our ability to trace, track, and isolate infected individuals. And so this is all part of what we call T-SQ, or testing, tracing, tracking, surveillance, and quarantine. That is designed, to help us resume in-person teaching and research functions. And in a little while, I'm going to ask Dr. Lawrence to speak a little bit more about that. But beyond the T-SQ, all community members will be asked to observe and abide by certain health and safety protocols that are based on existing national and state health advisories, as well as guidelines issued by local authorities that we have to adhere to. And so let me describe the key elements of that. First of all, social distancing will be required at all times of all faculty, staff, and students. Faculty and staff will be expected to particularly observe social distancing when outside of their individual workspaces and in them, and students when outside of their individual residential spaces. And this implies maintaining a minimum 6-foot distance between each individual and the next closest person at all times in all sessions. Now, cloth or disposable medical type mask will be required to be worn by all individuals in public spaces on the campus. Now, cloth masks should be hand washed at the end of each day. And additionally, students and faculty will be provided with disposable medical type masks, which must be worn in any and all instructional spaces. Cleaning and disinfecting of personal and common spaces will be a continuous process. And we will have protocols that require the cleaning of workspaces, including such things as wiping down chairs or desks before use. And we will be providing the cleaning supplies for that. Dr. Lawrence, maybe I will turn to you to give a brief description of T-cubed SQ and associated protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. So as Dr. Jackson just described, there are a few general principles that all members of our community will be required to follow in order for us to return. And that is they will, must be available for testing as required. The frequency of testing is still being debated, but certainly there will be at least one test for everyone on return to the campus for obvious reasons, as we don't know what the incidence will be in the areas that people are returning from. So we want to have a baseline, be sure that we know who's positive, who's negative as everyone returns. We hope that everyone will be negative. Social distancing will continue to be required. Now, as many of you have heard, there's some debate over what the proper distance is for social distancing. Can people still be infected at 6 feet? There is debate over that. That's also why facial coverings will be required when we are out in public. So if you have a personal space, you may work without a facial covering. If you have a residential space, you may work without a facial covering, but anytime you're outside of those spaces, a face covering will be required. Daily reporting. Everyone, students, staff, and faculty will be required to report daily on their health status and about their movements, where they've been, who they've had contact with. This is so if someone does become positive, we will be able to trace back the people who may have had contact much quicker. There will be another principle everyone will have to agree to, which is exclusion from the general campus community. There will be times, what I mean by this is what public health officials call quarantine and isolation. There may come a time if you test positive that we are going to require you to stay in isolation, or if you are a close contact, we'll require you to stay in quarantine. We will be checking on you regularly during those periods. And then cleaning and disinfecting, as Dr. Jackson mentioned, part of every health protocol will be to clean your spaces regularly and disinfect. Okay, so the testing, tracing, tracking, surveillance, quarantine, and isolation. Briefly, testing is going to be, just as you've heard from other areas that are testing, actual COVID-19 testing, the live virus testing. We will be testing everyone on the return to campus. And then after that, there will be an interval at which we will recommend regular testing. The interval is going to depend on, so if we go back a month, month and a half, we thought the interval needed to be every 2 weeks. And it may be that starting this fall, depending on the incidence in our area. It may be that we only do the regular testing every month if the incidence stays very low. So there's going to be a little flexibility to that. That may change depending on the general incidence in the population. Tracing, we're going to have a team of 6 certified tracers who will trace down all the contacts to any positive test we get back. So we'll be asking that positive to go into isolation. At the same time, our tracers will be looking up all the contacts that person has had, as well as interviewing that person to make sure we haven't missed any of the contacts. We'll be asking those contacts to stay in quarantine. Tracking refers to us looking at where those positives are occurring, right? We're going to be looking on campus. Are those positives occurring in one particular area? Do this seem to be when people cross paths in a certain area? And then, we'll be trying to de-densify that area if we find that is the case. We will also be surveilling, or this is in the public health terminology, surveillance, not the type of surveillance that public safety officers and or police use, meaning we'll be looking again at where those cases are occurring. We'll be looking at what the incidence is in different communities in the United States, so we can make decisions on whether we should bring people back from those areas. So that's what we mean by surveillance in the public health terminology of surveillance. Quarantine and isolation, the Q, that's again, as I mentioned in the tracing, we will be asking individuals who test positive to go into isolation. Then we'll be testing on or checking in with them twice a day to see what their status is. We will, by law, have to report anyone who has a positive to the local county health department. For students, that will be Rensselaer County Health Department. For some faculty and staff, that may be Albany County, that may be Saratoga County, that may be Rensselaer County, depending on where they live. And then quarantine, we'll be asking people with close contacts to stay in quarantine. We'll be arranging meals for students, both in isolation and quarantine, as well as a way to dispose their trash. And again, we'll be checking in on them regularly. I'm going to stop there, but we'll be available for answering questions later. Thank you.
So let me just, thank you very much, Les. So let me just kind of reiterate the key points that we will be doing testing on a recurrent basis with a certain frequency predicated on the health and conditions. There will be daily reporting, and we would ask people to keep a health and travel log that would be used for contact tracing. We will have our own trained contact tracers to follow through if someone tests positive for COVID-19. And we have identified quarantine and isolation housing for our resident students, and for others, we would expect it to be at home or at a healthcare facility if needed. We also are doing epidemiological modeling that the tracking would feed into, so we will have a sense of whether there are hotspots developing and or how there may be community spread. And so this is a kind of comprehensive approach. Let me talk about campus and residence life for a moment. And this again is another headline. The return to campus employs a risk-informed, social distancing approach, where we will have no more than 2 students per living space, which means room or apartment, and no more than 2 students per bathroom. And with that, we are reducing our residential density on the campus by 55%. We also will be looking at and measuring the capacity, well, we really have already done it, of common spaces, lounges, and study rooms to identify what their reduced capacity will be, and they would be monitored, their use would be monitored and enforced by our live-in residential deans. With respect to residential and retail dining, there will be social distancing in all dining halls and retail venues with identified a maximum seating capacity and seating arrangements for social distancing. There will be hand washing, personal hygiene, and use of hand sanitizers. All dining service employees will be subject to temperature checks using touchless technology. And anybody with an elevated temperature would be sent home. Anybody who handles food will wear face shields, masks, and gloves as part of their uniform requirements. And all other dining services staff will minimally wear masks and gloves. And cleaning and disinfecting will be performed between the meal periods in accordance with CDC guidelines. And there will be no buffets. And so that's very important. Then with respect to campus events and use of venues, all campus gatherings and events will be limited to 10 people or fewer. New event protocols will be implemented to approve and monitor the campus gatherings. Um, our emergency operations group, which you heard described, will be assigned to provide overall monitoring of the implementation of and adherence to our health and safety protocols, and public safety will play a critical role relative to the safety of the whole campus, including the new signage and mapping designed to ensure safe entry, egress, and access to our operating spaces. That also includes protocols for the safe use of our shuttles and any other transport vehicles. Now, I know that a number of you are interested in the NCAA programs, and the Institute will follow the guidance of New York State and will confer with the NCAA, the ECAC, and the Liberty League to make an informed decision regarding the return to collegiate athletic competition for the fall. And likewise, the recreational and intramural programs will be in complete alignment with federal, state, county, and institutional health and safety policies and protocols for testing, tracing, tracking, treatment, quarantine, or isolation as necessary. But at this point, no definite decision has been made regarding athletic competition for fall 2020. Now, on the instructional side, we have designed classes to have both in-person and remote instruction. And as well, there will be new pedagogical approaches and classroom design that will support social distancing. Laboratory courses will be designed as well, specifically for this approach. So to give you a few headlines, large enrollment classes that exceed 60 students will remain online, even if one is present on the campus. If the course content requires in-person instruction in a larger class, then multiple smaller sections will be created. Classes with 30 or fewer students will be conducted in person, and those in between will be conducted in a hybrid format. And that hybrid format could include a 50% split for alternating classes between remote and in-person class attendance. And of course, the seating in the classroom will maintain the CDC stipulated physical distancing criteria, and class schedules will be staggered to minimize interactions in the campus corridors, the major corridors. All students who attend in-person instruction will be required to wear the masks I described, and the faculty members will also practice social distancing and wear face shields while they're teaching. And there would be other protective clothing adopted as needed. Now, people have raised questions about performance, art, and studio related interactions. And the faculty with the provost and the dean of undergraduate education are looking at the role of technology to help provide safe and meaningful experiences in those courses. And then there's the research. The plan for return to on-campus research is proposed in 3 stages, 3 initial stages, and then a 4th stage being the eventual return to near normal interactions. The stages will involve at least 2 research shifts to minimize the number of researchers on campus at any given time. The first stage will involve a very small fraction of our community working on critical projects or those working at locations off the main campus. And those critical projects would include COVID-19 related biotechnology research and research in areas critical to national security. The second stage would allow about 10% of the research community on the campus at any given time, and it would prioritize those projects that have key deadlines and milestone requirements but with a specific focus on the academic progression of our graduate students. And then the third stage would involve the full experimental research community, but still working in shifts, and then when we can, the final stage. So that is a lot of information to digest. We will be posting this on our COVID-19 website, as well as spreading it through the web pages of relevant portfolios. And so with that, I will stop. And we have certain individuals whom we've asked to gather questions and to pose them to us to help clarify things. And we have people from our student body, from our parents, from our faculty, and from our staff. And so with that, I'm open to any questions that people may pose. John?
So the first question is from the Faculty Senate President, Dr. Jackson.
Okay.
And Professor Carr is out there somewhere. We'll find him.
Okay. Well, perhaps we should go on to the next questioner.
He's there, Dr. Jackson. He should just start talking and turn his camera on.
Hello? We'll return.
Okay, the second question was from the Faculty Senate Chair, Professor Dannon.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Can you hear us?
Yes. So I think Kaushik is also online, but he had different questions. Mine was just to, you sort of addressed it, but regarding research, we just noticed that SUNY laid out a very detailed plan on what to do and procedure to restart research. Do we have something similar coming? And do you know, like, what's the timeline?
We have an exact detailed research plan that is very detailed. As to when, I keep reminding people that there are a number of places that have talked about starting research, but in point of fact, what they're talking about is their plan to start research. And we will be sharing that plan with our research community shortly. Robert, I don't know if you would like to make a comment about that. Robert Hull.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jackson. So indeed, we do have very detailed mechanistic plans to make sure all the moving parts mesh to open the lab safely. And we're using this overarching metric that we want our researchers to be as safe in the lab as they are, at least as safe in the lab as they are in their daily lives. And we will be reaching out to center directors and then individual faculty with detailed questionnaires to make sure we're implementing the social distancing, the personal protective equipment, the cleaning, and other safety protocols. So you'll be seeing details on that very soon.
Did that answer your question, Professor Dannon?
Yes.
Is Professor Carr on?
Yes, President Jackson. So I'll quickly say out a few questions we collect on the faculty. First of all, there was a concern about some faculty about people who have some prior medical issues or very senior members and don't feel comfortable being in the class. So would they have a choice if their class does not specifically require in-person instruction?
Let me turn that to our provost. Prabhat?
Yes, thank you, Kaushik, for that question. I think we are, as we laid out the plan, the safety and security of our community, including faculty members, was a primary consideration. We have a set of guidelines that we have established as to how we would exclude faculty members who have vulnerabilities from being exposed to or being put in a high-risk situation. So that's something that we have in place.
And Professor Carr, how that would work out relative to whether they would deliver instruction remotely or be in the classroom would be a risk-informed decision that would come through a discussion and information from a physician. And there are some stringencies within the classrooms to protect faculty that we are putting into place with respect to even greater social distancing between the faculty member and students if there is an issue, as well as what kind of personal protective equipment one would work. And then in the extreme case, to have the person assigned to remote instruction. But that's for provost and the vice provost to work through, because we have to cover the in-person instruction classes. But we're very mindful of the fact of some people having vulnerabilities.
Okay, thank you. If I can move to the next question. So you mentioned about cleaning protocols in place. Would there be cleaning personnel who will be cleaning the classrooms after the students and the faculty have departed or before they are moving in?
Well, there are two things, well, three actually. The first is that we would be having cleaning supplies and asking people, just as a matter of being careful, to take the supplies as they come into the classroom and clean their personal spaces, the desks, the chairs, etc. The second is we are structuring the classes so that there isn't crowded entry and egress. The third is that as much as possible, if there's time, that there would at least be spray disinfection of the classrooms. And importantly, for every night, every classroom will be cleaned. So it's a combination of people looking after their personal space, disinfection based on the class schedules as much as we can, and then complete cleaning and disinfecting every night. Okay,
thank you. So I have one more question, if I can go ahead. So there's some, I don't know if it's some information floating around about some schools having opened or starting to open in terms of research in New York City and Massachusetts, and we are not able to do that. So would you clarify on that?
Well, you know, I am a trustee of MIT, and I will tell you MIT has not started any full research. Secondly, some of what the reopening is research administration as opposed to research fully. Secondly, in cases, and in New York City, they're very careful. If there is the first research that would be allowed is not unlike what we're doing, one research that relates to critical national needs. And so we're not at that point. And then finally, we have to ensure that everyone is trained to our protocols, that all of the personal protective equipment is in place, and that training has to do with how people adhere to the protocols, but also the staggered schedules and how people actually populate the labs. So even when we quote unquote start up, or as we move to that, we're moving into a phase to start training people specifically to this as we set up our testing and so on. And everyone has to be tested as well. So it's not that there's a startup and one walks in and goes back into laboratories in terms of business as usual. Also, when we start, we would not have graduate student offices occupied in the first instance. So there are a lot of things that people, and there's some other restrictions, and so there are a lot of things that people have to be trained to. So I would ask that you confer with Dr. Hull and Dr. Hajela so that, you know, people can begin to be trained to these protocols.
So you talked about, just as a quick follow up to that. So you talked about these different phases. So
Yes.
right now there's no time frame for.
That's because the universities are in phase 4. And that means it's the last phase of any reopening of a university. And the interesting thing is, it's not just that researchers go into the labs. There are a lot of things having to do with what happens with the graduate students, what kind of staff support is needed, and how all of that gets phased in. So again, I would ask you to confer with Dr. Hull and understand the stages, and we're only going to do them when we get the word and clarity of what startup in research really means. We've been specifically told we should not get ahead of the governor.
Yeah, thank you, President Jackson. That's all the 4 questions I had.
Thank you. I appreciate the questions.
So Dr. Jackson, the next several questions are from parents. And the first is from a person on our Parents Council, Susan Lobiondo.
Okay. Hi, Susan. If you're on mute, you should please take it off. I see that you're on.
Susan.
Susan, are you there?
Me?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I've only used Zoom. I've never used this, so.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of questions that not only pertain to me. I have a sophomore, so my son will be remote, but I'm trying to also represent what I think some other parents might have. So I have quite a few questions. First, dealing with the remote. I know in the spring we were sort of, rushed into going remote and there was no preparation. Will the classes be a little bit more structured for the remote session in the fall for, now that there's been a little bit more time to get acclimated and organized?
Yeah, that's a great question. Prabhat, do you want to address that?
Yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. So you're absolutely right. I mean, we pivoted to a remote instruction mode rather quickly in the spring semester. But now that we've had some time, we've actually had faculty committees that are looking at pedagogical innovations about various aspects of instruction, including courses that may be better structured in a studio format, or things that were of lab orientation. How could we actually bring them to students in a remote setting in a more effective way? So we are looking at all of those things. We have also deployed instructional designers who are actually training faculty into how to better design their courses so they can transition their content to either purely remote or a hybrid instruction mode. And this kind of training will actually go on throughout the next 2 or 3 months as they prepare for the fall semester.
Okay, and along those lines, like I know there are some classes that have mixed grades in them, like the sophomores, juniors, you know, they may not necessarily be exclusive to sophomores. So if they're registered for one that might be held in person, will they remotely be joining that in-person class?
They can, yes. So our baseline is that all courses will be available in remote format as well. And therefore, any participation by remote students in a class that's being taught live is entirely possible.
Okay. Okay, so then on changing for juniors, I know Dr. Jackson talked about having the juniors do their away semester in the spring, but what about those that do already have something secured for the fall? How will that work?
If they have something secured, they should be working with their school deans as well as student life to work through the fact that they would wish to be away in the fall. What that then may mean is that in the spring, because we would ask them to be away, they would then, if they're taking courses, would be taking them remotely.
Okay. And then I know, you know, obviously you talked about sports and a little bit about performance, but what about like clubs and activities? Will those still be available in the fall, or is that sort of a work in progress still?
No, the clubs and the activities would still would go on, but in a socially distanced way. And so let me ask Peter Konworski to speak a little bit more to that.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, and thank you for that question. You know, I think the thing we've been stressing since the start of these conversations, and even as we started this spring semester, we really practiced a number of social distancing protocols. And I think that is the goal. And as the president said earlier, you know, we think the threshold will be no more than 10 for events. And that will really limit the type of events, but it doesn't mean that we won't have a creative student body who can, you know, do gatherings virtually and build a sense of community. And within student life, I think we're deeply committed to thinking about this and using our class structure to really think about the freshman year experience and how the student experience happens with clubs and organizations. We've already had a number of conversations, and we actually have an evening meeting at 5 tonight to talk to student leaders about not only our protocols, but how they will use their creativity to apply and meet the standards and keep our community safe and healthy. So naturally, we will de-densify our venues, and we will, you know, we'll kind of monitor those thresholds so we don't get gatherings of groups larger than 10. And some of that will require us to remove furniture and change the way we have egress and access, as the president has outlined. But we expect that it will be a student experience, but it will be different, and we'll all have to adjust, and and we'll have to work together to make it the most positive and best experience possible, given the pandemic that we expect to still be in the fall.
Okay. And then just one last question. I know some of the parents had expressed concern over the type of COVID test that might be administered, because we know it's a pretty invasive test, the nasal one. Is that what will be administered, or is there an alternate using saliva or something?
Dr. Lawrence?
So as you are probably aware, there are multiple tests that are now approved by the FDA. There's the nasopharyngeal, the one that goes all the way back of the nasal passage, just at the top of the throat, which most people really don't like. It's the same one we use for influenza. There's the anterior nair, which anterior part of the nose test, which is now approved, that people can take themselves. There's also a throat swab, and then we hope before the fall that saliva will be approved for general testing. Our plan right now is to go with the anterior and mid-turbinate nasal swab, which each student, faculty, and staff can administer themselves. There's several reasons for doing this. One is for comfort of the student, faculty, and/or staff member. The second reason for doing it is so that we don't have to burn through as much personal protective equipment. Because if our nurses are required to take the sample, they have to have on a face mask, face shield, gown, gloves, booties, and they have to replace at a minimum the gloves with every patient. So we'll end up going through a tremendous amount of personal protective equipment. Whereas if we can have the individual collect a specimen themselves, that will, again, not only be more comfortable, but slow the burn through the personal protective equipment. Now we will monitor, we'll have the individual come in to our specimen collection area and monitor them taking their own sample. We anticipate that there will be a few that will just be too squeamish to take their own sample. And in those cases, our nurses will have to assist them or take the sample from them. Thanks for the question.
In addition, something you should know is that there will not be a mixing of the taking of the samples with the other medical activities that go on in the health center. Is that correct, Dr. Lawrence?
Yes, we're actually going to, this fall, we will have actually 3 separate facilities. We're going to have a specimen collection area, which will be separate from our other 2 areas. That way, no one's exposed to any illness as they come in to give their specimen. We will have a respiratory clinic area. Anyone who has a respiratory type infection will be sent to that area. Again, this is to minimize the exposure to other people who may be coming into the health center. And then there will be our general health area. So 3 different areas. And this is, again, to reduce the risk of transmission of COVID as people enter those areas to either do the specimen collection, come to our respiratory clinic area, or come to general health. We wouldn't want someone who has severe acne, who wants us to look at their acne, to be exposed to someone with a respiratory illness.
Okay.
And Teresa, go ahead if you can hear us.
Maybe we should tee up the next person as well, because they know it takes time for them to be able to link in with the audio or video.
Will do. And Teresa was having some problems getting on in the first place, so maybe it would be useful to come back to Teresa, and we'll just requeue her up. So let me go to the next person, Dr. Jackson, from our Society of Families, Darlene Yapley, who's a parent of a class of 21 student.
Hello? Well, we see Darlene, we just can't hear her. Well, let's see if we can get one of the 3, Dr. Jackson. The other person we have from the Society of Families is Dawn Fitzgerald, who's an alum class of 87 and a parent of a student class of 2018 and a student in the class of 2022. So we'll bring all 3 of them up and see who can ask a question. Why don't you leave them open and let's.
Hey, folks.
Hello, Dawn?
Hi, folks. This is Dawn Fitzgerald. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. You have to unmute yourself, I think.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. I had actually a few questions. One of the first ones is on the surveying of the students as to whether or not you've thought about potentially doing that to find out if they're interested in coming on campus or if they would prefer to do an off-campus for the semester. I know my son, he's a rising junior. Actually, he's in the Arch summer courses right now. He's very excited to come back on campus. But I know there may be others that have a concern and may not want to. And if they do choose to not come on campus, is there a continuity of the coursework that they can do the same courses online or not?
Yes, so as we had indicated, and Dr. Hajela had spoken to this as well, we're going to be offering the classes in a hybrid mode, such that any class we would be offering in person, a student could take remotely. We are, because we anticipate that there could be students, including some of our international students, who may not be able to get here, or people who have vulnerabilities and other reasons. And so the answer is yes, the students can do it. And we handle it on a matriculation basis. It's the choice of the student to let us know how they plan to matriculate. But the important thing is to register, is to matriculate.
Okay, and then they would get an opportunity to give you their preference as to whether they want to be on campus or not.
That's correct. I mean, we would prefer that those whom we would want on the campus do come to campus, but if there are reasons that a student can't do that, then we're prepared to accommodate that.
And if there is a student that's very passionate about coming on campus, but that they're not scheduled, is there an opportunity on a case-by-case basis to look at their situation?
No, other than in some very rare cases that we're considering in terms of people in specialized programs. But other than that, no, because the whole point here, Dawn, is to have the densification to be able to preserve the social distancing.
Clear, okay. And regarding going into quarantine, I know that some individuals may test positive but feel perfectly fine. Those students that feel perfectly fine, they would then still have that opportunity, even though they're in quarantine, to continue with the online component of each of their courses. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right. Great, okay, and then the last question I had was regarding the Arch summer experience. So typically my now junior would be on campus and having their courses summer. And then they'd also have the additional Arch experience. Is there any modifications or accommodations being made for those Arch summer students when they come back on campus to try to capture some of that community feel that they and an experience that they would have had they been on the summer?
You mean the students who are in this Arch summer semester now, but
Correct.
doing it remotely?
Yes.
Let Peter speak to that, yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, we are deeply committed to building that sense of community. That's one of the reasons we want them back on campus in the fall. And we'll be doing a number of activities over the summer, and their class officers have been doing a terrific job in just the first week of building that sense of community. But we really value the fact that they, as a community and a class, the class of 2022, will be able to sort of, participate this fall on campus. Now, obviously, they'll have to still maintain social distancing, but there will be opportunities for us to sort of group the group or gather the group. They just won't be in large gatherings. We'll be doing a number of initiatives, obviously many that will be school-based, or in other special interests, and especially as we think about the CCPD office, as we help them find their way placements for the spring, we'll be doing a number of activities that are designed around industries and various fields and professions. So, but that's a great question, and we're deeply committed to building that sense of community within the class of 2022.
I think the overarching message is that within the constraints of de-densification, social distancing, and so on, that our intent is to provide as robust a program as the students would expect when they're here, and as robust a program as is possible online. In fact, in some ways, as we go along, we're adding more and more to the online experience, as well as the counseling and outreach and community building and activities. And interestingly enough, when they're on the campus, because of the social distancing criteria and the limits to the sizes of meetings, the argument could well be made that there will be a lot more individualized attention and interaction as a consequence of it. So we may be finding a new normal that will propagate even beyond this period that we're in. I should say that when the students come in the spring, we're hopeful that the pandemic will be better in control, and we may be closer to a vaccine, so that some of these, the stringencies of some of these protocols will be relaxed, because we'll have a full sophomore class here. And so we're anticipating moving to a different set of protocols that would still be focused on health and safety, but we will have learned a lot about how to manage within a different densification model, but not the complete model, which is why we would still have the juniors away, except in rare circumstances.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So Dr. Jackson, we're going to try, I think we have Teresa for an on, and if she can get off mute,
Great.
I think she can ask a question.
Hi, Teresa.
Morning. So a couple questions, Dr. Jackson. One of them is in regards, we're an out-of-state family. And
Yes.
I'm just curious, how do we monitor where New York stands with the quarantining and all of this, and when students will be able to come back on campus, so that we as out-of-state families or out-of-country families can purchase our travel tickets for our student to return? We do have a rising junior who would be coming back to campus in the fall.
Well, I understand completely, and our provost has been on a group with provosts and presidents of the Council of Independent Colleges and Universities, where they've mapped out a set of baseline criteria that satisfy what is known of the New York hurdles and criteria. But then we've created our own against that, in some ways even more conservative. But even with that, New York is structured this way. There are different regions of the state. The state's been divided by the governor into, I believe, 10 or so different regions. Each region has to pass a certain number of hurdles that have to do with things like infection rates going down, ICU capacity, etc. And once they've passed certain hurdles, then they're allowed to open in phases. And so in phase one, certain economic sectors are allowed to start up, but start up in a way where they have to satisfy certain criteria. And then, so there's phase one and phase two, which is where most of the regions are or are moving to. New York City is just now reopening. Higher education, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is a phase 4 enterprise. And so the phases are according to timing. We're hopeful that in July, we'll know sooner if possible, but we are creatures of what New York State allows. But you can be sure that the minute we know, you will know. But we thought it would be important to have this town meeting and share our plans, and we will be publishing them on the website as well, so that you can, in terms of preparation, plan against it and hopefully the last thing will be to develop your travel plans. But we're pushing on every front to get the word from the governor as soon as possible. I'm on what's called the New York Forward Advisory Board that draws people from different economic sectors, and we meet with the governor's representatives to press the issue, and in touch with a gentleman who's another university president who actually heads up the whole education sector for the governor. The education sector, again, in each region is a phase 4 sector, and there's high sensitivity about the residential college experience. We have high sensitivity about it, which is why when you see our full plan, you'll see how comprehensive it is, and some might think how stringent it is, but it really is about the health and safety of our students and everyone on the campus.
Thank you.
We know, we'll let you know because it's important, and I understand that. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I did have one more question, Dr. Jackson.
Sure.
Force ROTC program at RPI.
Yes.
Do you have an idea of how that will look for those students? They'll be there in the fall. Will they be able to do their PT and things like that?
Is he, what year is he? Will he be?
He's junior, so he's going to field training in August and then.
Yeah, the juniors are invited to be here, and my understanding is that the ROTC units are doing their own planning. I'm going to ask Prabhat, our provost, who looks after this for us, to speak in a second. But we are also in discussions with them about what they've done when students are remote and what their plans are in that regard. But Prabhat, maybe you could speak to this a bit.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Yes, we have been in conversation with the commanding officers of the various ROTC units on our campus. As your son may have told you, I think they are paying remote attention to your son staying in physical fitness even while they are away from campus. But when they do come back, they'll be required to go through the various routines that the Air Force expects of them. But at the end of the day, it is going to be subject to whatever the university rules and regulations are in place at that particular time. So the Air Force unit is part of an educational unit on our campus, and they will adhere to the guidelines that the campus has for the safety of all students, and the commanding officers fully understand that.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate your communications throughout this whole time. Dr. Jackson, you and your faculty have done a great job. We appreciate you all.
Oh, well, thank you. We appreciate you and your students, your children. Thank you very much.
So Dr. Jackson, Darlene Yapley, who's a parent of a class of 2021 student, was having some audio problems, so she submitted 3 questions. I'll read them out real quick. First one was, how will you accommodate students with special health concerns possibly not coming to campus? For example, immunocompromised folks or those who have a higher health risk flying to campus.
Is the question, how will they get here, or how will we treat them when they are here, or whether they would be allowed not to come?
I'm reading the question, but I think it's both.
So the travel arrangements we don't control. However, number one, a student who, if a student does come but has special health concerns, we would accommodate that in the housing and in how we structure the class instruction. If, on the other hand, a student has special health concerns and feels and or their family feels it is imprudent for them to come, then we would accommodate them in the remote instruction mode. So we're prepared for whatever form there would be. And as we've de-densified the campus, it does allow us to try to help accommodate students as much as we can. So I think it's important to just let us know and to be particularly in touch with Dr. Lawrence so that we can figure out the best pathway for the given student.
Second question was, how do you plan on including students to know how to best support them during these changes?
Well, the Peters organization, the Student Life Division, we have an approach that we're undertaking. It's called It's Time, where time is an actual acronym, and it stands for training, implementation, monitoring, and enforcement, which really means compliance. And so we're going to be launching a set of activities to educate everyone to what the protocols are and the requirements and how they would transition back into the campus. Peter, do you want to say a few words?
Sure, Dr. Jackson, and thank you for that question, Darlene. I think a couple things, the president outlined, the goal is to really lessen risk and mitigate consequences. And so we need a collective action and we need to act as a community. Peer influence, and especially student to student, is one of the most powerful influences. And that's why you see us using things like resident assistants, iPersist mentors and tutors, and student leaders helping monitor, but also lead and mirror, model the way. And so we will continue to ask our students to comply with our PPE requirements and clean their workspaces and stay in a dedensified way. But we will only be successful in lessening the curve and in keeping ourselves healthy as a community if we all work together. And so all of us on the staff and faculty will be trained, but all of our students will also be trained, and will be trained in numerous conversations. There'll be online and virtual trainings. There'll be other conversations when students get to campus, and there will be a series of events and communications and signage that reinforce our messages around compliance. And when we talk about compliance, we're really asking everybody to do their part to keep our community safe. So we have a multifaceted tiered approach of communication and training that will start shortly in the summer, and then will continue into the fall and carry throughout the whole fall. And those messages will really just help us reinforce that we're all a community. We all need to hold each other accountable. We will ask, if you see somebody, to intervene and support your peers, just like we do around bystander intervention or alcohol education or Title IX training. We ask the students to work together to keep our community safe. And collectively, we are a much better community when we work together.
And to be a little bit more specific, we actually have an online training capability through a system called Percipio, and we intend to use that to provide specific online-based training, as well as the creation of a series of webinars and like activities as part of the training. And that's for everybody. That would be for faculty, staff, and students. I hope that's
Dr.
responsive.
Jackson, the last question from Darlene is, can you provide guidance on housing? If the student is not guaranteed housing and wants on-campus or off-campus housing, this is a challenging environment to secure housing, given perhaps an unclear start date, the advance commitment needed on leases, and et cetera.
Well, our commitment is, of course, to provide on-campus housing for all freshmen and all sophomores while they're here. Our de-densification model doesn't allow us to provide 100% housing for students in the other class years. Typically, our seniors, by and large, choose not to live on the campus, and many of our juniors. And I will say fraternities and sororities with houses will be affected by the de-densification requirements. And so that housing on average may not be available. And so the intent is that we do have an off-campus commons office, and that office is specifically charged with helping students find appropriate housing. And by the way, it may seem like it's a challenge to find off-campus housing in this environment, but in fact, the landlords are quite hungry. But we want to be sure that students are helped and get the appropriate advice so that they can live in a safe environment. But we're going to help out as much as we can. And to the extent that there may be some extra housing, we would particularly use it for students based on a risk and health related basis.
So shift next to Dr. Jackson to several pillars of Rensselaer. We have Jackie Farmer and Marie Diefenbach with us. Marie is going to ask the questions for both of them.
Okay. Hello, Marie.
Yep, good morning.
Good morning. If you could take mute off, there we are.
I did. Okay, I think we're good. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
Oh, thank you.
As you know, I represent staff, and my question is, will there be accommodations made for staff who, because of either qualifying vulnerable health conditions or just because of their comfort level, are not necessarily comfortable to return to campus, particularly those staff with high levels of face-to-face student contact? And will those decisions be made by portfolio? Is that how that would work? Or are there blanket HR policies in place for that kind of thing?
I'm going to let Curtis Powell speak to that.
Marie, thank you for that question. Obviously, under the American with Disabilities Act, they have identified, given COVID-19, individuals that do have high risk. Now, our protocols here will be very similar to what Dr. Lawrence will use for the students. If there is someone that has identified that they are high risk group because of COVID-19, we will take that in consideration based on medical documentation. We will review that and make the necessary changes and reasonable accommodations for that specific employee. And so those are protocols. We've already exercised some of those with our essential staff that are in place. We'll use those same protocols for faculty as we work through this process. So thank you for the question.
And thank you. And then I just have one quick additional question in terms of the calendar, Dr. Jackson. Because classes are ending earlier before Thanksgiving, the in-person aspect of it, are we starting any earlier in August as a result?
Well, the actual start of the semester doesn't change, but we would be inviting students who would be here to come perhaps a few days earlier in order to be sure that the training and the assignments and so on are well pinned down, because the operational mode will be different. And so again, the actual semester will run and start when it would start. But yes, we would like to have students come a little early in order to make a smooth transition into being on the campus.
That's great, thank you. I was particularly concerned for those class of 2022 students who have a short break between the end of classes and the start of the semester. So I'm glad they still have those 10 days, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah, let me just make sure I'm telling you the correct information. Professor Hajela, that is true as to when the semester starts, correct?
That is true, Dr. Jackson.
Okay.
It starts on the scheduled date.
August 31st, I believe.
31st, yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Prabhat. Thank you both.
Sure. Thank you.
So next up, Dr. Jackson, our newly elected Grand Marshal, Advith Narayan, who's the class of 2021.
Okay, good morning. I finally get to see someone. We can't hear you though, yet. I still can't hear you.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Okay. So I have 3 questions. Would you like me to ask them one by one?
Sure.
Okay. So my first question is, in terms of Greek life, what adjustments would the Greek community need to make to Russian recruitment as well as the live-in requirements for them to operate during the fall semester?
Well, the likelihood is that we won't be able to have people live in the houses in the fall. However, we would still like to have the Greek community be able to do rush activities. And so Peter's organization, particularly through the Greek Life Office, has been asked to work with the leadership of our Greek community to structure how we would be doing that. We also feel, and we would like to have the help of the Greeks relative to helping us, not as official contact tracers, but to be able to help monitor their members' health and help us to keep everybody safe. And if we need to have the contact tracers, to really work with you to be able to do that, that would be really helpful. But we do intend for you to be able to carry out rush activities, albeit in a modified form, because we think that's important to continue.
Awesome. So my next question is kind of in that same vein. Even through the global pandemic, one of my kind of personal goals as GM is to make sure that I don't lose sight of the core issues and initiatives that we were previously engaged in. And as an institute, we were working hard on issues such as Greek life. So what resources will still be kind of devoted to continuing work on these initiatives, given that it's possible to do so safely?
Oh, I think those will continue, but let me ask Peter to speak to that.
Sure. And Advaith, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us early. I know you're on the West Coast. It's
8:30 in the morning now. He's in good shape, right?
That's true. A couple of things. One is that we're meeting with the Greek community this afternoon. And I think to say, we had a really strong partnership in closing the system in the spring and keeping the community safe. And that's a testament to the strength of the partnership and the commitment that we've all brought to making sure that our students in Greek life and across campus are healthy and well. We'll be talking today about those standards and trying to make sure that everybody understands the reasons. And we've had those conversations over the last 2 months with the Greek community, and we both share there are concerns about both the health and safety, and they've recognized them, as well as the financial implications. And we've all talked about it in multiple correspondence. We do have resources, and Travis Apgar, our Dean of Students, has been working with the staff in Living and Learning. And we do have some of our staff, who are already identified who will be working with the Greek community, including John Lawler, our Dean of Living and Learning. And so, we continue to have staff and personnel working on the community, and we continue to move forward on the Greek life initiatives. And so it is an important priority, as we've discussed. It's an area of the community that we want to continue to see growth. We've continued to invest in, as Dr. Jackson said, the recruitment to make sure that we can be effective in recruitment. But we also recognize it's a partnership, and we all need to continue to work together. And again, I just want to compliment the group. We've worked well together, and we need to continue working as a Greek Life Commons, as the president often says. As a community, we'll be stronger and we'll move through this. We will all be faced with challenges this fall, but we know that there will be resources and support, and I'll be stepping up myself to continue to provide that support to our Greek leaders, our Greek members, and our Greek chapters.
And we want the activities to continue as much as possible. And we don't, but in a different form. I mean, I think that's the challenge, but it's one that I think people can handle. And I think it's important for the Greeks to know that we don't intend to have them go out of existence or be bankrupt because of what's going on. And that's why we want to continue with the membership intake and so forth.
That's fair. And my last question is about kind of student finances. So how will financial aid packages and tuition be affected or adjusted in the case of either sophomores being off campus in the fall or because the semester will end earlier on Thanksgiving break?
The semester doesn't end at Thanksgiving break. It's just that the in-person part of the instruction switches to the remote mode. Students who are not in residence will not be charged room and board. I leave it to Peter and his organization working with the student leaders relative to the club-specific fees. But we don't, at this point, expect to make changes to tuition or health-related fees because in point of fact, we're having to do more things to be able to do all of the things we're doing in the classrooms to provide the safety there with the use of technology, with the remote learning, to do things in parallel in terms of the hybrid teaching, even making up exams that have to go be given it in different time zones to accommodate students being in different time zones, and ensuring that we get computers into the hands of every freshman, irrespective of their financial circumstance. These things are big expenses for the university, as well as the testing, tracking, tracing, et cetera, protocols. And so that's where we are. I think people sometimes equate the tuition with just whether I'm sitting in a class or not. And the real issue is the delivery of the education at a high level, and to make all of the kinds of accommodations we know have to be made, and others that will come up that we don't even know about at this point. But our intent and expectation is that the teaching and learning will be at the Rensselaer high level, and we're very, sensitive about that. And we've really beefed up and strengthened things with the telehealth and so forth, and counseling. So there's a lot that's going on, and with what Dr. Lawrence is putting into place, and it requires help as well from the CIO organization and others, and the fact of having the contact tracers. All these things are critical for being able to move forward. So if you could help to promulgate those key ideas, that would be helpful. And if you have any other questions, even offline, we'd be happy to chat with you about those.
I appreciate this, and I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great.
Dr. Jackson, the next person is also the newly elected president of.
By the way, congratulations, Advait.
Thank you.
And congratulations to Anissa Chanuri.
Yes, sir. Congratulations to you as well. Good morning.
We can see Anissa, but we can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
Great.
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. So I have a few quick questions.
Sure.
First, regarding the email sent out 2 days ago regarding fall reopen, where it was stated that there will be no large gatherings of any kind on campus.
Yes.
So the union executive board wants to ensure that we're all on the same page regarding clubs, organizations, athletic teams, so that all groups are prepared and treated equally. Will there be a public and published set of rules or guidelines defining exactly what all of this means with respect to number of participants, location, or physical distance proximity? I know you just stated that 10 people is kind of the maximum that you were thinking, but is there?
Oh, no, the maximum is set. It is 10.
Okay.
And there are specific physical distancing criteria, and my understanding, the Student Life Division is creating a reservation system to have the meetings and events reserved and have the appropriate spaces for them.
Okay.
With the right protocols in place.
Will that be documented in a public space for all students to?
Oh yeah, it's all written down, and we'll be publishing it online. We're just finishing dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So we'll be putting the basics of the plan online, but the actual plans break down into the different areas, and it's hundreds of pages long. But those parts that are important for you we certainly intend to share, and even we call it training, but educating people to them. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you. And so social distancing protocols will naturally demand more time, effort, and resources to allow to monitor school buildings, including the student union. Will there be any additional resources given, either in the form of technology or additional safety and social distancing?
Somebody's flushing something.
Yeah, I'm not sure what
But
that is.
the answer is, yeah, we've done the financial planning relative to what's required to carry out the various protocols. You know, where those resources sit depends upon what it takes to do it. A lot of it will come through the administration division in terms of how the spaces are set up, how they are cleaned and disinfected, et cetera, et cetera. But the answer is yes, we've planned and budgeted that all out.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Jackson, another student, and it turns out all of our students are from the class of 2021. So it's now the great class of 2021.
Great class, yes.
One of our red and white student leaders, Katika Verma.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Dr. Jackson, and thank you for the introduction. Good morning. First of all, thank you everyone for your time. I know this is a really important conversation. So thank you for getting on to the town hall and addressing all these questions. I actually have two questions. One is pertaining to the academics of the students. I know that in this past spring semester, when we had to rush into online courses, we decided that as a community that we would have the option of pass no crediting courses or getting it in as a letter grade. Is that a principle that will continue as we move on with this remote / in-person hybrid, or will that be modified?
I'll have the provost address that, Prabhat.
Thank you, Gitika, for that question. The adjustment to the pass no credit was done for that one semester during the summer semester, the art summer. We have actually reverted back to our previously adopted system, and that's what we are going to stay with as we come back into the fall semester. It's important for students to understand that having a pass no credit grade sometimes impacts their ability to get into graduate schools. Employers look for grades on specific courses as they recruit them into their organization, and we do not wish to tie the hands of or somehow water down their transcript in such a way that they are not competitive in the open.
Absolutely. Thank you. I just want to make sure that we clarify that for the students. My second question is actually pertaining to the student-run activities on campus. I know, Dr. Jackson, earlier you established that we would have a cap of 10 students just to limit the number of people interacting with each other. But from a student leader perspective, as we try to plan for future events, how should the student leaders kind of take that approach? Should they plan to have some larger gatherings in the spring semester, or should they try to stay away from any large gatherings of any sort?
I would ask you to focus on the smaller gatherings. And as we go through and we see how the public health situation evolves and how we look at how we phase in the sophomores as the juniors transition. But we know that we'll have more people living in our housing because they're sophomores. That's where we expect to make the biggest adjustment. But the limit on the sizes of gatherings and so on could evolve depending upon the public health guidelines. But so I would say stick with how you can be creative within the guidelines that we're starting with, and then we'll evolve from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I know that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Great.
Dr. Jackson, the next student is from our Student Athlete Advisory Council. She's a representative, and her name is Leanne Jones.
Okay.
So while we're waiting for her to get here, Dr. Jackson, there was an additional question from the pillar that wasn't able to get on, Jackie Farmer. And Jackie asked, will staff be requested to have a staggered schedule? If so, how will that work?
Curtis?
Yeah, and as we reopen the campus, we will stagger employees back to campus because don't forget, as we talked about this entire process, we want to ensure that there is I got to get this word correct.
Densification.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. Yeah. But we want to be able to ensure that as we bring individuals back to campus. So there will be a process as we do that. But thank you for the question.
And I'm not sure we have Leanne, Dr. Jackson. So, and that was the end of our scheduled questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone who joined with us this morning. And I thank you for all the questions. They're very important. We will be having people reaching out, and we will try to create, as we've done in the past, a Q&A section to our posting, which we will update as more questions come in, so we can have everyone as informed as possible. And we'll even start with the questions that have come up today and have them put up in a way that is informative for folks. I want to thank all of you as well for being patient with the technology as we've gone through the meeting. And the message I'd like to leave you with is that even as things evolve, we are in a pandemic, and we will still be in a pandemic in the fall, as I've said before. A lot is being learned about how COVID is transmitted, but that still is not totally understood. There are a lot of advances being made in treatment modalities, and of course there's a race for a vaccine, a global race. And the race is, less about people against each other and more about the race against the disease. And so we do need to think about what that means, and that anything that we're laying out in terms of requirements for being on the campus and how we're handling everything from our housing to our teaching and learning and activities is all predicated on lessening risk and mitigating consequence. But there is no perfect system, and so no one can guarantee that there would not be disease appearance on our campus. We want to severely limit that probability, but drawing on what Peter said earlier, it requires all of us, in order to be where we wish to be, to pull together, which I know we will, and to work together and adhere to these protocols, even as they appear stringent. They're based on the best public health information that we have, coupled with our own conservatism. And Dr. Lawrence and I are probably the most conservative, but I've listened to him a lot, completely on this. And so we're trying to do our best for all of you. And before we close, I thought it might be interesting, but it'll be difficult for him to do it in 5 minutes. But I'm going to ask John Dordick to kind of give us a few words about where things are relative to understanding COVID and what some of the breakthroughs that people may see relative to either treatment or vaccines. We've been involved with the COVID fight, both with supplying equipment and PPE to local hospitals and working with our partners at Mount Sinai relative to actual certain treatment modalities, and John Dordick has been a key player in that. So John, now that I've put you on the spot.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Jackson. I'll be brief. We all have heard many things about what is happening with respect to new treatments, vaccines, various therapeutics. One thing that has become clear is that this has probably been the greatest level of interaction among academic industry labs that I've ever seen in my 30+ years here in academia. And that says a lot about what we are looking to do, we being the global group of researchers that what we're trying to do to combat this problem. It's also a tremendous awareness of what we need to do to understand infectious disease. It's something that we have often neglected, and clearly we can't do that anymore. In terms of things everybody wants to know, when is a vaccine going to be ready? There's already going to be likely some phase 3, which is the highest level trials that will start maybe even sometime this summer. A very difficult prospect, so we're going to have to weigh the risk and the benefit of things like a vaccine. Certainly, simple things can make a huge difference. I know people complain a bit about wearing masks, but if you take a look at countries that mask use is actually rather common, if not socially accepted, such as Korea and Japan, and they've had very low effects of the virus. And so it makes a huge difference. And it's something that we can all do that has nothing to do with a vaccine or a therapeutic. But on the therapeutic side, we've learned a lot about how to treat patients. We've learned a lot about what actually causes most of the most significant morbidity and mortality, which is the inflammatory response, and how we can begin to clamp down on that. So I think even if people do get sick, and we're seeing an uptick in a number of states around the country, I think the treatment approaches are going to be much more aggressively done earlier and with much greater effect than what we saw in the early stages of this pandemic, particularly here in New York State. So I think that overall, we're learning a lot about how the disease is transmitted. We also learn a lot about how science occurs in a very dirty way, in the sense that all these this new information comes up and then gets reported and only then gets pushed back in terms of what it really means. But I think one thing is clear is that, I think the researchers across the board, not just biological, but also in engineering and other aspects of science, and in humanities and social sciences as well, are going to enable us to overcome this problem. And we're going to get through it. And eventually we'll have a vaccine, and eventually this coronavirus will return as common colds down the road a number of years from now, which is essentially how all these coronaviruses effectively started. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Jackson.
Well, thank you, John. And again, thank all of you for joining us this morning. We'll do this again, and we will be posting the basics of the plan on our website, later this week. But we wanted to share this with you so that you could begin your planning and thinking as to what is best for all of us. So again, it's a great community. Let's keep all rowing in the same direction. Thank you very much. It's nice to talk to all of you.